Thank you. I'm your chair this evening, Mike Goodman. This meeting is being recorded and is live on the council's YouTube channel. There is no fire alarms anticipated today. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the green running man signs above the doors and make your way to the rear of the car park. The organiser of the meeting will tell you when it is safe to return. Please make sure all your phones are either muted or switched off. Now, all councillors have already had the agenda for today's meeting, and any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will start the meeting with a roll call of committee members present, which will include declarations of interest. When you hear your name, please unmute your microphone and confirm you are present. And please state whether you have any declaration of interest in terms of agenda or not. Sarah, could you do the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barlow.
Present and no declarations that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny Brown.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Bethany Collins.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Goodman.
Present and no declaration of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Anne Hall. No. Councillor Matt Hall. No. Councillor Hartnell. No. Councillor Johns.
Present, thank you, and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Levine.
Present, no declaration. Please, may we remove our jackets? It's very hot in here, just looking at you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKinder.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Toy. No. Councillor Wibley. No. Thank you, Chair. The meeting's quorate.
Thank you. Now, looking outside the Cabinet, does any councillor have any comments on the, any members outside the meeting have any declaration of interest? Colin? No? No? Okay. So, agenda item minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of January. It was some time ago. Does any councillor have any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting held on this date, the 30th of January? It's a long time ago. So thank you then. I will sign those minutes later. Have we got any apologies? I've got two here, Councillor Davey and Councillor Chapman. Are there any others?
Yeah, that's correct. No others.
No
Thank
others,
you, Chair.
right. Declaration of interest we've done. Public speaking. There's no public speaking requested today, and there's no matters of urgency. Item 6, confidential items. There are none. Item 7, decisions made by Cabinet, including called in by members for scrutiny in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. There are none. Item 8 is the annual monitoring and service improvement record report 2024-2025, and it's pages 8 to 16 of your report. I'm going to hand over to Melanie now, who's going to introduce this report, but Andrew at the end is going to also comment about the housing. Thank you for coming, Andrew.
Apologies to those of you who were at Cabinet yesterday, because you're going to hear exactly the same as what I said yesterday, although I'll probably say something completely different, so we'll see. So yes, this is the annual complaint monitoring report that we bring each year to give us a breakdown of the complaints that we receive. As you know, as an organisation, we're on a huge change journey. So complaints are really, really important to enable us to learn where there's issues that we need to improve upon, and to basically have lessons learned so that we can move things forward. So it's healthy to have complaints, and obviously when you're on a change journey and there are issues, we encourage people to complain, because you know, there's a process and it enables them to raise any concerns you know, that they have. So in Appendix A, I've set out the number of stage 1 complaints that we had in 24-25, which was 372. Of those, 135 went to stage 2. 63% of complaints were resolved at the first stage. And then in terms of the response time to complaints, we responded an average of 25 working days on stage 1 and 46 working days on stage 2. And that's clearly an area where we're looking to improve upon those figures and move that in a better direction. So of 65% of stage 1 complaints were upheld or partially upheld, and 73% of stage 1 housing complaints were upheld or partially upheld. If I can take you to the table on the second page of Appendix A, I think that gives us a really interesting comparison between complaints that we received in 23, 24, 25 financial years. And you'll see that there's been a steady increase over those years. Now, that is not a surprise. That is happening nationally, that there are definitely more complaints. I see that in freedom of information requests, subject access requests, and we know from the Ombudsman that they are seeing over a 50% increase in the number of complaints coming to them. So we are not unusual in terms of the number of complaints increasing. In terms of where those complaints relate to, again, there's no surprises there. We would expect to see housing and planning coming within that top 2. Obviously, the number of housing ones are higher than what we would want to be, but that's where we're obviously on this significant change journey. And I think what's really important to say is that we are still going through that change journey. We're absolutely not where we want to be yet. And complaints are often sort of 18 months down the line, because it takes a long time for somebody to be really dissatisfied, to, they raise concerns, then they decide they want to do a stage 1 complaint, then they might go to stage 2, and then they may go off to the Ombudsman. And I think the Ombudsman is taking, and this is off the top of my head, but about 9 months, something like that, to consider complaints. So, it's a long process. So we are not going to see the massive improvements that we're hoping for in terms of complaints for some time to come. So the second table on that same page shows the housing complaints and the breakdown at stage 1 of where those are. So you'll see that just under 85% of those relate to repairs, which again, we would expect, and that has certainly been the trend over recent years, with estate management coming behind that, but obviously, a significantly smaller number. In terms of all corporate complaints that we have, so, all of our complaints, again, that is showing at stage 2 that housing, again, is first and planning is second, with a slightly lower number of housing ones. I think slightly higher number of planning ones going to stage 2, which probably also is to be expected. And then I suppose the most important thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, is about those learning points, making sure that with every complaint that comes through this door, that we are learning any lessons that come from that complaint, and we are endeavouring not to repeat the same issues over and over again. So in terms of the planning service, the issues definitely, as many of you will remember, sort of a year ago, where we had key gaps in service within staffing levels. So a lot of work was put in terms of recruiting to those posts. And we've also had quite a lot of changes in legislation, which obviously also has an impact, and also results in, more challenge as well. So in terms of planning actions, we've had new officers that have been recruited, and the number of complaints for delays in determining planning applications is absolutely beginning to fall. So we are starting to see the benefits from that. In terms of housing, I'll start, but I'll obviously come over to Andy in a moment. I mean, clearly there is a trend driving some of the complaints, delays in carrying out repairs, quality of repairs, communication challenges around appointments that ensure that we're communicating efficiently and promptly with tenants. But as you know, we've made a number of changes, bringing in new officers to better manage the volume of complaints, but that is still a piece of work in progress. And I've highlighted a key number of housing actions. Many of those were ones that were from last year, but I've certainly added one more. But there's definitely a lot more that we've been doing, and I think we probably missed a trick that we probably could have gone into a bit more detail in that table in terms of just emphasising a little bit of that. So I maybe hand over to Andy at that point that will perhaps just add a little bit more context around the housing side. Thanks, Andy.
Hit the right button. There we go. Not at all. Thank you. So yeah, thank you, Mel. And you're absolutely right. I think there's a journey that we're going on with in housing in general, and complaints is a key part of that. We're seeing across housing at the moment a real upward trajectory in our performance in many areas, and we've seen that as well in our tenant satisfaction measures. But we've highlighted ourselves that even in every way in our results for our tenant satisfaction, that we know that our handling of complaints is one of the lower areas, an area that we want to focus on and improve on. And what you said there, Mel, is absolutely correct, that in that change journey, there's always going to be that delay in seeing the outcome of those changes and improvements we're making to service delivery being felt on the ground by our tenants. But what we do know is obviously this report is ending at the end of the financial year of 24-25. We don't stop then. Our work's continued through into the first quarter of this year. In that time, we've brought in additional resource again into that team to help look at our complaints, but also to lead on proactive work with our tenants to head off complaints before they need to get to that stage. Looking at where we've got complex cases that need management, closer management and coordination from the beginning. We had quite a heavy backlog of complaints in housing towards the end of last year. That was for a number of reasons. Partly that was because of resource, and part of that was also because of the process that we were running in terms of how we reviewed and signed off those complaints that was causing a bottleneck. So we've reviewed all of that. We sent a report to ELT about our proposals, which was agreed, and we've changed that, and we've now cleared the backlog of complaints in housing. I checked with officers today, and currently I think we've got 3 stage 1s that are being investigated and written, and I think it's around about 6 stage 2s, and there's a number that have been written and now with me for sign off, so I take responsibility that they need my signature on them to move them forward. We also have ensured that our tenant complaints panel is now getting to see real complaints. So we're asking tenants who've submitted complaints for permission to share those, and where they do, our tenants complaints panel are looking at those, looking at the learning that's coming out of that and the key themes, and making recommendations of how we can further improve moving forward. And we've had some feedback from all of our involved tenant groups in housing that they're saying that it's now being felt out in the communities, the changes that we're making to housing. And I think that's really key. We will never not have complaints. I think no industry or business could ever operate in that way. Of course, we want to reduce them. I'd love to see those numbers go down. But we are seeing that compared to the Housemark data, which gives us the average data and performance across housing, actually as a housing provider, we only receive in the average median 1 extra complaint per week than the industry average for housing. That doesn't mean I don't want to be better than the average median, but we're not seeing an extortionate amount compared to our counterparts across the country. So lots of work going on. We have an action plan written up and live in place for housing complaints. Absolutely want to get better. But overall, I think we're seeing a trajectory, certainly in this financial year, that those changes are having an impact. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So thank you, Andy. So yeah, the final 2 parts of my report were the Ombudsman's report. I was hoping to bring you the latest Housing Ombudsman report. Unfortunately, we've not yet received that. We're anticipating that sometime in July. Knowing that things have not been as good as they should have been in the past. We're not expecting that to be particularly good. It may well be negative, and it's going to be a while, as I've said already, before that filters through. So we obviously await that report with interest. But what I have been able to present to you is the Ombudsman report for the local government, and I always forget the name, Social Care Ombudsman, which has come in within the last month, and that is showing a very positive picture in terms of all of our other corporate complaints, so the non-housing complaints, and that is basically showing that there were 30 complaints that went to the Ombudsman. Of those, 11 were not for the Ombudsman or weren't ready for them to investigate, presumably because they hadn't gone through our full internal complaints procedures. 16 were closed after initial inquiries where the local government ombudsman decided not to investigate further. Of the 3 that they decided needed to be investigated, only 1 was upheld. So, and in terms of those, you'll see that at the very end of the document, there's a table showing the number upheld. So compared to the industry, the local government average, we had 33% of complaints were upheld, whereas that compares to 66% in similar authorities. And obviously, in terms of satisfactory remedies provided by the council, we had 100% satisfaction rate. So, so there's some really, really positive direction of travel in there. So I'm very happy between Andy and I. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Before I let it open to everybody, you mentioned an action plan. Has that been shared with anybody?
It's an internal operational action plan that the teams are working on. So it's kind of our internal.
Because I'm just wondering, thinking ahead, you've got the HRB later in July, whether sharing what you're doing is action would be a positive way of showing. Because I think the issue is, and it came up last night, is you're doing things and perhaps we don't know you're doing them. And I'm just trying to help you to say, well, actually, if you told us what you were doing, it would be helpful. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is very little on it that I'd need to redact. So yeah, I will absolutely share that with the Housing Review Board at the end of the month. Yes.
Thank you. Right. So outside, the vast number of councillors outside, have you got anything before I come inside? No? Okay. Yes. You're first away.
Thank you, Chair. If I look at the first table, at the first pink table on page 10, I see that 65% of stage 1 complaints were upheld or partially upheld. Can I then deduce from that although we've had an enormous increase in complaints, the complaints are substantive rather than trivial?
There will be a whole mixture, but some of them absolutely will be substantive. And you know, bearing in mind that, so I mean, bearing in mind that a number of them we know, obviously, the higher proportion relate to housing, and we know they relate to repairs. Then clearly, you know, from the point of view of tenants, though, you know, those will be. You wouldn't describe them as trivial issues from from a customer perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I did look at this last night. We talked about this, obviously, at Cabinet last night. And the thing that did concern me, the first thing that struck me was that when you look back, 23, 24, the key actions that you're doing are exactly the same, bar one little line. And to me, that's like, we get complaints. We can't do a lot about it. We have 4,000 houses. We're bound to get some complaints. So therefore, this is what we do. But it's obviously not working. But you're now saying you've got another action plan, which, to be honest, that should have been on this. Whatever you're doing now that you think is the thing that is going to change it and make the difference. Because otherwise, why should we believe that it's going to make a difference? Because it's exactly the same as what you put in last year's report. And it's got worse. I'm also very concerned when you encourage people to complain. No, but why would you do that? Why would you encourage people? Surely the thing to do is to try and fix the problem and not encourage people to complain. You don't want people to complain. It's bad for our reputation. It's bad for the punters. So to me, that would be the first point I would want to get over, that at the end of the day, you know, let's not encourage people to complain. Let's see if we can find a way. I mean, usually you go through mediation first before you start complaining, to find a starting point to say, okay, what's the problem? Can we allay your fears? There's no need to complain as such, in my view. You're going to tell me that's wrong, I'm sure. When we had HRB, the last HRB, which I know was a while ago, you said you had 12 jobs you were looking to fill. Out of those 12 jobs, how many are in the complaints department? You know, to me, this reminds me, I've sat on this committee for 2 years, and I think the only thing I can honestly say that we have properly achieved, and I know there's lots of little things, but the main thing we achieved was the 106 department, that when we first started, they came in, and then Cabinet took it over and said, oh, we'll do it. But we started that action, and it happened, and they put people to it. And it's like all these things, isn't it? You put the resources to it, you can solve the problem. Now, they did that, and it was very, very successful. I haven't had a single complaint about 106. Everyone sings its praises, it's wonderful. And I just wonder, you know, this is important, solving people's problems, and at the end of the day, we should be treating it with a higher degree of urgency, I think. And as I said, this just rolling on year after year, you know, with the promise that it's coming next year will get better, but you're saying that it's unlikely to the next year, the ones we've got through. So that's 3 years now we will have the same thing. Anyway, and that's all I've really got to say on this. You know, and also, much as we say repairs is terrible and all the rest of it in housing, there are places in housing that are doing really well. You know, antisocial behaviour, that's dropped hugely. I mean, you know, well done, whoever's in that. You know, someone needs patting, and most of them are up a little bit or down. It's just repairs, and it's a huge jump, which obviously is important for people. So to me, this goes back to the same thing with HRB, where what we're hearing on the ground from members of people that I speak to, residents and people, at the end of the day, they're not telling me that everything's wonderful. It might be getting better, but it's not what I'm hearing. And I'm just concerned that, I just get concerned that at the end of the day, we're not on top of repairs somehow. And I know we've had to cut the money down because we've got to be within budget. And I brought it up at the last HRB where the numbers didn't quite add up, where we're cutting back, we're doing less, but everything's looking wonderful on the stats. And it just doesn't quite add up somewhere along the line. Anyway, thank you.
Did you want to take those?
Shall I start with the points that aren't housing related?
Yeah.
So the point about encouraging people to complain, and it may be the way I relayed it, but you want a process where people know that they can make a complaint if they want, because ultimately, if they're dissatisfied, they can go off to the Ombudsman. So that's what I mean. It's also a way that if people are dissatisfied, I mean, because obviously a lot happens to try and resolve people's issues. So often people will put in what do we call service requests, and we try and deal with that service request. But ultimately, if somebody is not happy with our service, then they should have the ability to go through that complaints process. But what I don't want you to think is we're sat there trying to force people down a complaints process. That's not it. But you should be very open and honest that there's a process you can go through, and ultimately, if you're not happy, you've got the ability to go off to the Ombudsman. So, so that was that side of things. In terms of the report and whether we could put some more detail in relation to the housing things that are happening, I'll take full responsibility for that because that's my report. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, we could have perhaps put some more detail in around that. So, you know, I'll take the responsibility for that. I think that was the main things was, and then the housing.
But before you, I think the point that Ian's making about the being encouraged people to report, what he was really saying, because I've got a note to say this, is that what I didn't see in the report is enough proactiveness to say, actually, how do we stop happening in the first place? Yes, you investigate a complaint, but how do we stop those happening in the first place? I think that was what Ian was trying to say.
Yeah.
And perhaps we could have some focus on that. That was what I learned from that, and that's trying to be helpful, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, Andrew, over to you.
And that's what the lessons learned is about,
absolutely.
but absolutely.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to really tie that up, actually, that point, Chair, I agree. I think any information we get, whether it's a complaint and learning, whether it's customer involvement and feedback, whether it's data out of our systems, we can have reams and reams of that, but if we don't do anything with it and implement that into something, then it's useless information to us. Sorry, I don't know why I've obviously spoken too much today. So yeah, I completely concur, and I think we know about something, certainly within housing, I'm not speaking for other departments, certainly in housing, something we can get better at. You know, we've got some really involved tenants, which is great. What we want to see is actually now how we use that intelligence to inform our services better moving forward. And that the same goes for complaints. In terms of the jobs that we've got, also vacant roles across housing, there was one that is related to complaints, a housing performance lead. We've recruited to that post. We've had someone filling it in temporarily through agency on an ad hoc basis for us out of hours. We've now permanently recruited, and they'll be starting at the beginning of August. So we have got extra resource, well, that's the extra resource I allude to that's been helping us on a ad hoc basis, but we're going to have that on a more permanent basis come the end of this month. And I think in terms of the other recruitment and things that we're doing, and there'll be more on that HRB at the end of this month, actually, we know that recruiting to those other posts and those gaps within the service is one key element that will also support with that kind of pre-work, I think, that the chair was talking about there, around how we head off these complaints, and you've mentioned that as well, Councillor Barlow, around resourcing some of the services, and it's that balancing act, isn't it, and making sure we're delivering the right service to our tenants so that there isn't a need to complain. And I think if we look at complaints in a silo of, oh, how do we deal with complaints? Oh, well, we need to write the responses and get them out the door, and then that will lower our response times. Of course, that's one part of it. But actually, every element of what we do as a housing service impacts on the experience of our tenants. And if our experience isn't good, then as Mel talks about, they've got the right to complain, and absolutely, and then you'll see the outcome of poor experience or poor service delivery. So kind of really every stream that we look at within the housing service, where we look for improvements, and ASB is a good case and example. We know that a couple of years ago we had an ombudsman ruling about our misadministration of an ASB case. That resulted in an action plan and a change to policy and change to delivery. And teams have worked really hard on that. And now we're in a position where we're seeing a reduction, but that was back in 2023 that we got that administration made those changes. So it takes time to see that result on paper at the end for the end user. So yeah, I think it's a case, as I sort of mentioned earlier, about all of those changes that we're making across housing having an impact on the experience of the end user, and that's going to take time. But I think my feeling is, and my hope, but the general feeling is that we're going in the right direction. I don't think I ever claim that we're there, and that it's a done job, and I know Tracy doesn't either. But we've set it on the right trajectory, and that's the hope, and that we'll see that result through future data that comes out of complaints.
Do you want to come back on the second, then I'll go to Vicky?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the main thing is repairs, isn't it? Mm-hmm. But we don't do our repairs, do we? That's subcontracted out. I mean, is that where the issue is?
So I suppose anecdotally what I would say is I always expect repairs to be the highest level of complaint within any housing service. It's the key factor for many of our tenants, and most of us we live in homes, whether we own or rent them, and actually living in a well-maintained home is what most of us want. So if something goes wrong with that process, then it's going to cause a complaint. It's also the key area that we have contact with our tenants. So, I think in 24-25, I hope I'm not misquoting, but I think it was over 18,500 repairs we completed across our properties. So actually, when you break that down into the number of complaints that we had, I think when we worked it out, it was 1.something% of repairs resulted in a complaint. And I'm sorry, I haven't got the actual figures in front of me, but it was around about that. And I know we popped that in a report at the end of the year for HRB, I think. So, but yeah, but absolutely. But if there's learning about repairs, if we get complaint about communication, so I see every stage 2 complaint that comes through housing, and so I see that there's a lot about communication, and appointment was cancelled, but I wasn't told, and then when you dig down into it, maybe actually we did try and phone, but we couldn't get through. But actually, we could have sent a text message. There are other things we could have done to take the learning from that and try and implement that moving forward. But what I would say is when it says repairs, it's not necessarily that a repair was done badly. It's not that we've had all of those complaints because we've gone out and left a gaping hole in someone's roof and in a terrible situation. It could be that because that repair, because they wanted a new kitchen, but we only replaced the drawer, and that could result in a repairs-related complaint. And it could be appointment-based, it could be time-based. So there's lots that goes into that, and it's not necessarily broken out in the other way. But all of that complaint learning is passed over and goes into our operational meetings with our contractors.
Okay, Vicky.
Just wanted to, so you have a breakdown of that. So quite rightly, if someone's moaning that we haven't put a new kitchen in when we've just fixed something, then that's not really a complaint to me. Why is that in on a complaint? I presume that's one of the 33% that doesn't get past stage 1. So 65% of them are more substantial. But I mean, well, how are we going to improve it? So, getting people to say, well, you can't complain about that, it's ridiculous, because it's just blocking up the system. Why are we entertaining that?
Then they'll complain about stuff.
And I'm sorry, just before I say, I would say, and I'm not I know I'm always seen criticising, but out of 4,177 homes, you're not doing too badly. I mean, you would expect some complaints, wouldn't you? Well, you must have them. 4,177, you're going to get some problems. So it's not all bad. I'm just saying, my job here is to say, how can we improve situations? And what I want is solutions, not the same things that we had last year saying, that's what we're doing. I would like you to say, well, we're going to sift them out more, or we're going to say, that's not really a complaint, and you're going to let us know, out of the 300 and whatever it was complaints, actually, this percentage was, and a few examples. I don't want you to just pick out the ones so we all go, well, they're all ridiculous, but I just think we need more information, because it looks bad, but if it isn't bad, then I don't want to waste my time with it. I'd rather move on to something else, like glyphosate, but I'm not allowed to say that.
Should we move on then? Vicky now.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Good luck, Mike. So what I was going to ask similar sort of questions, but in a slightly different way. So I appreciate the report, thank you. I think there are bits in there that, as councillors, make it very difficult for us to go back to anybody who has a complaint, because there is the statistics, but there's no answers, if that makes sense. So, for example, when we have complaints about repairs, you did touch on this just now, is it the time taken to start the repairs that people are complaining about, or is it the repairs themselves? And the reason I asked that is I asked this 6 years ago when I joined the council. I asked again 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and today. Do we actually have anybody checking these repairs from the district council? Because as Ian rightly pointed out, we subcontract these repairs and maintenance, etc., for our properties we outsource it. So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I know of quite a few people that live in our council accommodation, and they say that they put in a concern as a roof tile issue or a kitchen issue, etc. They phone up district council, they take that on board, they send it off. Somebody then comes out and assesses it. That assessor then goes away. Once they've made an appointment, which they don't always turn up at, I've been told, but as I say, I'm doing it in brackets because I don't want to get into that. They then come back, report what the fault is, etc. It then gets assessed as to whether or not it's an immediate, or not type of job. They then get the contract to do the work, and they go out and they do the work. They then go back and say the work's finished, it gets signed off at district council, and they get paid. Does anybody actually check it? Because each year I've asked, I've been told, well, no, that's not part of what we do. But that's what I've been told previously, which is why I'm raising it again today. I'm aware of people who've turned around and said to me, when they've rung up and turned around and said, I've got an issue with this, I've reported it, I've been told they've been out and fixed it, but how did they get access to the house? And when I've rung up to ask about it, it's been taken off the system because they've been told it's been repaired. Again, it's only the information that I'm receiving. So my second question would be, councillors, and there's 60 of us, receive an awful lot of complaints from residents. As we all know, social media, etc., 95% of it is complaining. It's just what people love to do. So we receive complaints on behalf of residents. are officers happy to discuss these complaints with councillors if we raise them? And I have to be honest, I'm not a great fan of those councillor forms because you never speak to the same officer each time, because obviously the way that it's done, so you have to go over the whole process again. Are officers happy to discuss it with councillors? Are they happy to share their reports with councillors on those particular issues that have been raised by the councillor on behalf of a resident? So basically, are they happy to keep councillors in the loop? Because we're the ones that are on the floor, so to speak. We're the ones that get, when we're in the local supermarket or a shop, excuse me, I've got a problem with, can you come and look? I don't go and look because obviously I'm not qualified, but I say, well, if you email me, I will raise that on your behalf. Next time I see them, I haven't heard anything. And I've got no idea where it is or even if it's been looked at. So those points, please.
Through you, Chair.
Yeah, no, you carry on, please.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. So in terms of quality check, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So, of course, we, as I mentioned, we last year, I think 18,500 jobs, we cannot check them all. So, you know, our standard jobs that we raise out to our contractors is a partnership contract. There's always got to be an element of trust. You know, if they've gone out to replace a tap for us or something, we can't go and check all of those jobs, but I don't think that's what you're asking anyway. On higher value jobs, absolutely. And again, it depends. There's almost a sort of tier in what we would do. So if it's planned works, we actually are on site managing the contractor regularly anyway. So we're there throughout the process. So that's usually major refurbishment work. Say we're replacing the roof on a block of flats, or, you know, sort of really large scale jobs that will have a surveyor from you know, within East Devon's housing team who's out there overseeing that process from start to finish. If it's more of a minor work, so I don't know, replacing a front wall on a property, no, that's a job we often do, but come to mind, then yes, that would absolutely be outsourced. But if it's a higher value job, then we would go check that work after it's done. But also our contractor portal, when they complete works, they upload before and after photos so that we can desktop evaluate jobs, so we can pick also. But absolutely, of course, there are scenarios where jobs slip through the net, a job is closed down, it's marked as complete on a system, actually it should have come through as no contact or no access, or do you know what I mean? There's always going to be those odd ones that happen, and when we pick them up, of course, we deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But as a general rule, high value jobs absolutely are checked because there's a bigger risk, I suppose, in terms of the money that we're investing and what should be coming out of that. Equally, if we've done a number of repairs that wouldn't fall under that, but we get a complaint in from a tenant telling us, I'm really unhappy, actually, whether that's a formal complaint or a phone call to say, I'm really unhappy, your contractor's just left and I don't like the work they did, we would then send out one of our repair surveyors to go and look at what's been, you know, what they're talking about, to go and assess whether do we need to go back to our contractor and tell them we're not happy. So there's sort of, yeah, various checks in place. In terms of complaints coming through you guys, actually, just to confirm, if you use the councillor inquiry form, that goes to the same officers. So actually, you should get more consistent service. So, for example, the repairs councillor inquiry form goes to one person in our repairs team, and I'm copied in, so I see them. So it's 2 people at the moment. I need to change that because now we've got some extra resource and more people can be involved. But actually, yeah, you'll get funneled through a more succinct contact. It's the issue comes with emails, actually, that it's kind of who's around to pick it up, and they sort of go all over the shop. So that should help streamline that process. Of course, where a tenant's given permission for us to share certain information about their account, we will, whether that's with you guys or if that's another external advocate for them. But as a matter of course, you know, for example, if you've told us about a tenant, but they've not given permission for us to feed back the update on their case or send a copy of the correspondence to their ward member, then we wouldn't do that as a matter of course. But if it's a specific request and permission that's given, then we'll absolutely try and facilitate.
Yeah.
Thank you. So picking up on Councillor Barlow's comment earlier with what we could do to cut down the complaints procedure, etc. For example, the majority of our houses are either semi-detached, terraced, or something of the such. We don't have that many detached properties. So, for example, if they're semi-detached terraced, they're all built at the same time. So if somebody complains and says, you know, the roof is terrible, etc., etc., would it not make sense to look at all the roofs on that terrace at the same time to see whether or not they need doing? And if they don't need doing, etc., obviously let the person, that you know, the other residents be aware. That way, we're being proactive. We're telling people, right, this roof needs doing because I quite often get people saying, well, my neighbour's had this done, they've had a kitchen done, or they've had that done, and they've had that done. Why isn't mine being done? So actually, if all the houses are built around roughly the same time, and I'm sure we've got a record somewhere that says that kitchen's been repaired because they had a flood or from the bathroom or something, so it doesn't need doing. If we could keep more of the people in the loop, etc., because if the scaffolding's up, I would imagine that it's cheaper to do scaffolding on a whole row than it is one, take it down, take it away, oh, now we've got to come back a couple of weeks later and do another one. Do you see what I mean? And also with the complaints thing, maybe if it is a large job, the contractor goes back to you and says, we've done a great job, these are the photos. Perhaps possibly get in touch with whoever's house it is, accommodation it is, and say, are you satisfied with it? You're less likely to get complaints if you approach them first. The chances are they're going to say, yes, it's a fantastic job. Occasionally they might say, well, actually, I wanted it in, you know, bright pink instead of magnolia, in which case you can turn around and say, well, actually, it's in the conservation area or whatever, and we can't. And then a complaint isn't raised in the first place. Just trying to be proactive, as Councillor Barlow said, just putting those little bits in there where we turn around and say, we are trying to cover all bases. We're doing as much as we can. I appreciate that as a council, we've got a lot of accommodation. We don't have a lot of money to pay for all of these things. But if we can do a two-bird, one-stone kind of approach, it might help a little bit.
Future. No, excellent questions, and I think if I may say, kind of this is a great highlight of how it's so multifaceted. What goes into causing that complaint is sort of this root system beneath, and many ways it can go into it. But you're absolutely right. So you know, the utopia of asset management is that whole house approach. Where, yeah, whether it's a house or a block, if you're putting the scaffolding up because the windows need doing, well, let's look at the render, let's look at the guttering and take a sensible approach. All I can really say on that at this moment in time is it's relying on our stock condition survey and our business investment planning, and there are some papers coming to the Housing Review Board at the end of this month that will allude to what the future of that could look like. But you're absolutely on the right track in terms of that's definitely a way you would want to manage your assets. On our large planned works, so where we do large scale, you know, let's say we refit a street full of kitchens, or, you know, we've done an adaptations program, we survey every tenant on the planned works side. What we're looking at within housing, and we're in live discussions with some potential companies so we can go through procurement processes, what we call transactional surveying. And so it's ultimately looking at how do we get that live feedback, and we're not waiting for an annual tenant satisfaction measure survey result or that complaint to land and tell us something was wrong, or them to be so annoyed they have to pick up the phone and express their frustration to the call centre. So that's, you know, a system whereby, for example, we would upload into the system every job that's been completed that week across all of our stock with the for example, mobile numbers of all those tenants who have one, and it would send out a text survey to say, we completed a repair in your property this week. Could you just respond on a scale of 1 to 5? How satisfied were you? And then it will highlight to us live feedback of, this tenant with job number, ED, whatever, was really unhappy. Actually, they only gave us a 1, and that will then trigger us to be able to pick up the phone and say, we understand you're unhappy. We know your contractor's out this week. Tell us why. What went wrong? Can I put it right for you? So it's how do we, get to ahead of it and not be so reactional and be planned with it. So absolutely, they're all the things that we're looking at and would want to be implementing, and hopefully will be.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to find myself disagreeing with Councillor Barlow. You heard it here first. On the subject of complaints, because I think that if a complaint is real and reasonable, it should be expressed by the person who feels that they have a complaint to make. Because if it isn't actually expressed, they tend to become festering sores. You know, it's the sort of thing that grinds away at people. can make them very negative into the future anyway. So I think it's good to hear. At which point it's an opportunity for the organisation to shine. I have a suspicion that we may have been missing that opportunity on a number of occasions. What leads me to that notion is the response times that we're seeing. 25 days for stage 1 average, 46 for stage 2. And these are working days. Seems to me to be quite a long time. And I think if most people putting a complaint in would expect to receive a response reasonably quickly within a week or two. Now, I appreciate that everybody's busy and some of these complaints they're necessarily quite complex. But do we have a target? Are we working towards a target? I know it's continual improvement, but do we have a number where we say that's optimum, so that we actually get to a point at some point, hopefully in the near future, where we can say to people, we expect to respond to you within X number of days.
Absolutely.
I think at the moment it's too long.
Yeah, no. It's within our policy. So we certainly with the housing ombudsman, we have a statutory responsibility to try and achieve a certain deadline. We don't with the local government and housing ombudsman, although I think that will come in due course. But we still set the same target in our policy, which is 20 days, isn't it? I've just gone blank in my head.
It's, we're going to get this wrong now, aren't we? It's 10 working days for stage 1, 20 for stage 2, I believe.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So yeah, that's absolutely, and in many cases we're achieving that, but obviously because we've had this backlog of complaints, that is obviously skewing the figures. So one thing, when at the moment, I've got some gaps within my service on the complaint side, and the one thing that I want to develop is we can hone down a little bit more into the detail about, well, actually non-housing complaints are taking this long, so we can get some more granular detail for you as a committee, so you can get underneath some of these figures a bit more, but I need some more resource to do that, and some better, I want to improve the look of the reports as well and have some more, I call them whizzy charts, which is not very technical language, but you know what I mean.
Jenny.
Just the first part of the question, when did John Golding leave?
It would have been about April 2023, I think. Oh, was it in the summer? Was June? No, I started in July, and he'd already left. So April that year.
Right, so you had a chance to get in and then have a real look at the situation and see what's going on, because as Ian says, it is going round and round with the same things. With the communications, I've been hearing that for ages, and it just feels like your finger's not on the pulse as much as you probably would like it to be. These forms I've got a real issue with, because if I've got someone who's actually been having emailed contact with you, and I get in touch and I'm told to put it on a form, and I say, but this is an old thing going on. I've got one that was written to me today, Nicola, woman, I've got the case here, and she's in Honiton, and she's saying the gutters have never been cleaned in the time they've lived there, March 2019. These are flats. And you just feel that things like, you've said this before, haven't you, going around and cleaning gutters at flats is such a simple thing to keep going, to keep them clear so you stop having mould and damp getting in. So can the council tenants actually get in touch themselves on the forms? We don't have to do it on their behalf, do we? They can do it themselves. And are all these complaints, you say you've got extra complaints now, are these all coming through on these forms? Have people suddenly found out how to use the forms? Because you said you've got more complaints than you had before.
No, members of the public don't use those forms. No. Those forms are purely for members, so we can make sure that we're, we're keeping an eye on you're getting responses in a timely manner and understand some of the themes. But no, members of the public will engage with us in whatever way that they want to. You know, they'll either pick up the phone or they'll put it in writing or whatever. So absolutely, there's no barriers to members of the public putting in complaints.
All right then, if I send this across to you again, can you sort this lady out, please?
Anything else, Jenny? one more.
Thank you, Chair. So in recycling, our company that we hire in recycling, if they don't hit certain KPIs, they get penalised. Do we penalise our repair people for the amount of complaints we receive? Because at the end of the day, when you do that, my point is, do they have skin in the game? Are they interested, or are they passionate about doing it because they know if they get repairs again or complaints against them, it's gonna affect them? So that's the first point. And the software you talk about, this software where you can just put the amount in and you get the mobile numbers and then we can do it out. You sound like you know that software, you've used it before, it's off the shelf, and doesn't sound hugely expensive. It seems a pretty basic sort of system. You input in data and it tells you what to do. Why haven't we got it? Are we waiting for some miraculous strata to do their bit, or is it something that for £20,000 we could go out and buy it that would then make your life a lot easier? And basically, well, if it makes your life easier, it would then help our residents, and for £20,000 that would probably be good value for money, rather than wait for strata trying to invent the system that you know already exists.
Yeah, so I'll answer the software question first. We looked at an option last summer. It was very expensive, and I personally wouldn't be able to advocate for spending for the one that we looked at last summer. Then, without boring with details, with all the changes that we had in property and assets and vacancies and recruitment, etc., that was something that was part. We had higher priorities at the time. Now that we've got our new corporate lead for property and assets in, Nathan, there's lots of projects in train. That's one of them, and he's on leave at the moment. But I know when he left on Tuesday, he sent an email to one of the providers about how we take that forward. The next step will be to get proper pricing together so that we can take it to ELT. In the first instance, to look at spend, etc., etc. Obviously, we've got to follow through procurement processes. But yes, you're absolutely right. There are off-the-shelf options out there, and it will not be a case, or certainly I don't plan on it being a case, that we need to build something bespoke. There's lots of pre-made stuff for housing providers out there that we can take advantage of. In terms of penalising for complaints received, absolutely. If there is a complaint received where our contractor's in the wrong, there's all sorts of things we do. First of all, we share learning and feedback, of course. We recall where we need them to return and put right. But also our contractors are asked to pay compensation where they've clearly been at fault, to compensate in other ways. So I don't know, for argument's sake, they damaged a tenant's carpet. We might say, well, actually, you need to go and get that cleaned or replace that carpet. Do you know what I mean? So absolutely, there is a joined up approach, certainly not in a reprimand kind of, well, yeah, no, it's a partnership. So it's looking at together, where's this gone wrong? How are you going to put it right for us? Where can we work together to put that right? And how do we learn from it and try and stop that from happening again in the future? But it's a key conversation. They also join, we have a weekly housing complaints call where we look at live complaints and the issues, and we have representatives from our contractors on that call as well to make sure that we're getting the right information and that flow of information as well.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to tell you that complaints can be dangerous things. There's a small village in the Black Downs in which there is a terrace of council houses. And some of the occupants complained to me that an unoccupied house in the terrace had been broken into by some of the tenants who helped themselves to all sorts of goodies. So I put in a councillor inquiry form. I got an answer back within 10 working days, and the answer was, we've been to the house, inspected it, no willful damage, but the garden is very untidy and needs seeing to. Which they did, and discovered an unexploded Second World War bomb.
Thank you. So if nobody else I've got a few things to. Did you want?
Yeah, I've got a couple.
You go first. You go. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to commend officers for the detail in the report, which is very helpful. A couple of suggestions which might make it easier for the committee to deal with these reports in future. To me, that you need a little bit of context. So the scale of what's being done versus the number of complaints. So, for instance, I think we heard for housing that 1% of repairs leads to 1% of repairs end up with a complaint. So those sort of facts would give us an idea. Also, just how many repairs. Again, you mentioned that figure in your comments, but to have those sort of things in the report. I noticed the Housing Ombudsman one had the number of properties, because obviously that's how they rate us against other. But in our own report, I mean, some councillors are aware of these things anyway. Maybe I'm not as aware as I should be. So give us a better feel for, 100 complaints sounds really bad, but if you're doing 1 million things, that's not too bad at all, really. So give us that sort of idea. And also we can see if that, I guess the number of houses doesn't change very much, but the number of repairs we might carry out will be changing. So year on year, are we doing more repairs? How often do these service requests from tenants that come in, which those are not complaints, they're just like, please can I have this? What's the ratio of service requests to complaints? Give us a feel for, actually, yeah, we deal with most things that tenants ask us for without the tenant needing to go on and make a complaint. And then the other thing I'd like to comment on is that the old adage, prevention is better than cure. So while we're putting a lot of effort here into resolving complaints, which we obviously have to take complaints seriously as an organisation. What I'd like to be able to do is and it sounds like some of the analysis you're doing is, okay, we've had this complaint or there's a couple of complaints there in a similar area, that will spark some background work, which might then involve some other repairs elsewhere or other projects. And if we can then give some idea as to what scale of new work have we undertaken as a council based on us spotting there's something going wrong here, we're going to try and head off those future complaints by putting resources into that. I think that'd be really useful. Again, showing to our residents that we're not just blindly handling request after request, but we're trying to be a bit more intelligent about there's a pattern here. Can we economise on scale, as Councillor Johns said? Obviously, just because we repair one kitchen doesn't mean we can do all 4,000. That's patently not going to be the case. But so if we could put that sort of detail in, and also marry the complaint figures with the tenant satisfaction figures that we have. And maybe that's more a thing for HRB, but again, it gives you that scale of, well, actually, the majority are relatively happy. There are always some that are not. So, thanks.
All I was going to say, I'm very happy to look at including all of those. The only one that I'm not sure is the ratio of service requests to complaints and whether we hold that information in that way, but we can certainly have a conversation about that. But everything else, absolutely, we can.
Okay, well, thank you for that discussion. And I think we all know how much work has been put in this last 18 months in particular to try to improve our housing stock, try to repair our housing. However, this report doesn't make good reading, whichever way we put it. We're 100% over on the average response times for stage 1 and over 100% late on stage 2. And we've seen a significant increase in stage 1 and stage 2 complaints. So that is concerning. And in particular, as many people have said, on the repair side. What also concerns me is this report will not show it, but I think it's worth mentioning it tonight. I do think we need to start understanding what do these complaints mean when we don't do repairs and people have to move out of their houses. And I've got a number of emails from people who are in accommodation, which is costing this council a lot of money because repairs after several months haven't been completed. What's a separate issue? It is important to identify, I think, that the problems with repairs. I can remember 2 years ago, this council on the 6th of July said the chair outlined recent discussions with others on housing issues, and work was underway to see if we could best scrutinise that work as the remit fell to the Housing Review Board, and what we wanted to do to see if we could help the Housing Review Board. Well, that didn't happen, and here we are 2 years later, we have still got a bad set of figures. And I'm going to again say that I think there is an opportunity for this committee to work alongside and help the Housing Review Board to look at scrutinising elements of housing, because it is quite clear in my 2 years, Housing Review Board receive reports, but they don't scrutinise. That's a fact, and that you can look at I believe there's an opportunity, and I said it in Cabinet last night, that we could form a task group with the HRB and to start look at some of the issues that have come up tonight to try to help this council improve. I think it would be a worthwhile piece of work to do that. And I would like us to consider making that recommendation to the council to do that, because I think there's some talent in this room and talent in Housing Review, but if you were purely focused on looking at scrutinising certain elements to help to understand, and we've had some great stories told us today, and I'm not criticising any work they're doing, but I think councillors could help facilitate some of that improvement by scrutinising. But I know one or two of you have mentioned it before about doing that. Do you feel that's something we should be considering doing purely to help this council?
So one thing that I would say is I'm aware of various residents, and this is directed at Andrew, I'm aware of various residents that the repairs might need doing. They might have got into such a state where the resident has to move out while the repairs are being made. But my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it can be very difficult to move a resident out of their permanent home into a temporary home if it's not suitable for them. Quite often we have residents that have adaptations within their accommodation, and to find a temporary accommodation with the same similar adaptations can be quite difficult. So I do feel that sometimes the scale of having the repairs done is down to the fact that to move that family out for the period of time that it's being repaired can have a knock-on effect as to how long it takes to do these things. Is that correct? I'm aware of a couple of incidences similar to that.
I'm certain there would be cases where trying to find suitable accommodation will have delayed a repair, and I know of one or two recently where it's been particularly tricky, and we've sourced and sorted, and then the tenant has expressed a different need to maybe that which we were aware of originally, and so there's always complexities. But actually, ultimately, when we do need to, we call it decanting, when we do need to decant a tenant for a repair reason or health and safety reason, whatever that be, the team generally are actually very good at finding what is needed. The issue I think we find is actually the cost that comes with that. So the more specialist the need, and I know as you said, Chair, I think it is a slightly different subject, but we're looking at options around that and how we can utilise our own existing stock for temporary accommodation when we need to move tenants out to do works to their homes, etc. So,
and to me, from what I'm having through on my emails, is the length of time it's taken, that people are quite happy. They're in superb accommodation, but it's costing this council a lot of money to house them there. And while the repairs gone on, and these repairs are taking some considerable time. And I just think we need to look at that. And how much is it costing this council? I think that's the one element I think we need to look at. Yes.
So what I was going to say is I just wanted to know whether or not what I was thinking and what I've received via emails was correct or not, because obviously we as councillors only get one side of the story. And as I always say, there's three sides, side A, side B, and what actually happens. So you don't always get all the full facts, which is why I like to clarify first. So going back to Mike's point just now, is that something, I don't sit on Housing Review Board, and I'll be honest, I don't attend very many of the meetings. I must, but trying to fit it in at the moment, it's been a bit manic. So my question would be, I'm assuming, and I could be completely wrong, Housing Review Board get all of these reports, they're advised of these incidences, etc. I don't know, do they scrutinise it? Do they look to see what changes, etc., could be made, what could be done to improve, etc.? I honestly don't know, so I'm not trying to put a cat in the pigeons, as it were. I don't know. If they do, then great. If they don't, is it something we could assist with? I don't honestly know.
Well, I don't know who wants to answer that, because I know the answer, but
Through you, Chair.
yes.
So, I mean, from my point of view, Vicky, we've got three panels that scrutinise. That's overview, scrutiny, and HRB. And HRB do a lot of work around scrutinising the work within our regulated housing service. So I would say that that does happen within the HRB scrutiny panel. Yes.
Well, I beg to suggest that I've been here 2 years, and I've never seen any TAF group organise with the HRB. I've never seen a report that's been scrutinised. And the word scrutinise is different than accepting a report. But I hear what you say. Ian.
Yeah, Chair, I think if I sat on HRB, I'd be a little bit miffed if we think we can do better. So I can understand. But I think the point of offering assistance to them, but perhaps trying to say, in something that also affects the rest of the council, procurement. It's one of the things that you're saying you want to procure things. There's lots of things that we procure against around the council. Consultants that we call in. When the not on HRB but on planning. So we had the water survey that we were waiting for 4 years. HRB, the housing stock survey. It's come back again now. They've still got to work on it. Still got to do more things on it because they're not happy with the results that come back. They've got to go back again. And that's been going on for 4 years, 3 years, more than that probably. But these are the things that I don't understand, that if you procure someone to do something, if it's a contract, then why aren't we holding their feet to the fire? And there's many things that I think, we go out and we spend money. Last night it was brought up about some figures that were quite large in Cranbrook. And again, we don't, it's almost like we trust these people, our partners we talk about. Your partner isn't here taking the flak with you on the side of this, and it's their cause. So to me, if it was my partner, I'd want him sat beside me going, well, why aren't the repairs done? What are the problems? So I just think that we're good at going out and getting these contracts and getting consultants in, but I don't think we're perhaps hard enough on what we do and how we check that we're actually getting value for money.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, then I'll bring it to a close.
Yeah, so I have been on the Housing Review Board, and much as you want to scrutinise, there is so much on the agenda that it's impossible to have any in-depth conversations or debates about what's going on. So if we could help to assist as a TAF with them on just, an item rather than the whole thing, I'd be quite willing to.
Okay, well, I said what I said, and I said it last night. I think there's a great opportunity of this group working with HRB to properly scrutinise some of the elements, which I don't believe is currently being done. But I'm happy that if you don't want us to put ourselves up to do that work, I'm happy to carry on and leave it to the HRB. But I strongly believe we could help. Even
So, Chair, I totally disagree with what you said about us helping HRB, because to me it comes across as a takeover bid. We've got a committee of councillors. Those councillors are just as good as us and are trying to do their job. We've got a remit of the scrutiny committee. They've got a remit for the housing board. And I don't see how we have got any right to ask to interfere in the work of that other committee. Committees are independent, and we've got to respect the ability of the councillors that are on those committees. Thank you.
yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would very much agree with Councillor Levine's thing there. I mean, the peer review came back and told us the need to have the scrutiny committees we've got. I think for us to then start trying to take over and say, well, actually, we can do a better job is, as Councillor Barlow said, is going to go down like a lead balloon. I think we need, there are good reasons to have this separation of committees. And I think when we get these sort of reports, some of what we're doing to request additional data will help. And maybe that helps focus some of the actions. And maybe that also gives more ammunition for when HRB is saying, well, look, why are some of these things not happening the way we want or the way our tenants want? Well, let's have some data. But I don't think we should be going in and really trying to make, even if we make that offer, it can look like a takeover bid. So I think we have to be very careful about doing it. I wouldn't be in favour of that. Thank you.
That is fine. All I want to make it absolutely clear to you, I wasn't suggesting in any shape or form we take over. All I was suggesting was to help, because they're not, they haven't had the capacity so far in my 2 years. And as Jenny says, they don't scrutinise in the way I think they could to improve some of these reports we've got here. But that is your decision, that is fine. But just remember, 2 years ago, this committee did discuss this and said that they thought it was important that we scrutinised it. Then the peer review took place and they said that's the job of HRB. And so far, HRB have not, to my knowledge, done much scrutinising. But sorry, Karen.
I was just sort of wondering, so the Housing Review Board meets quarterly, I believe that's in line with the reports. Yeah. If what Councillor Brown was saying is that there's a lot on the agenda, perhaps it's worth a recommendation to review how often the Housing Review Board meets, so that they've got potentially more time to look at everything that's coming through and then scrutinise further. That might be an option rather than us looking at it. But I agree with Councillor McKinder. I don't think that we should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would obviously be a decision for HRB.
Yes.
And the fact that it says that they've got to meet 4 times a year, obviously they can meet as many times extra as they want. But I also know, and Andy will be acutely aware, they are having lots of other meetings that are informal meetings behind, so that they're getting into some of this detail. So there is a lot going on, but that's not necessarily what people are seeing in committees. So, but yeah, that would be a decision for HRB.
Okay, so we will note this report in. Thank you very much for the report. And we will move on to item 9, which is the changes to the agriculture property relief and business property relief, pages 17 to 21. And Andy Wood is on holiday, but Melanie's going to introduce this report. It's a pretty self-explanatory report.
Yeah, I think it is pretty self-explanatory in that effectively what it's saying is that really it's felt that this is something that there's not enough sufficient data for this council to be able to really get underneath this, but it's something that's already being looked at by the select committee. And it highlights all the work that they're doing and the concerns that they've raised. So the recommendation in front of you is a recommend that you note the content of the report and acknowledge the level of granular level data through which to accurately measure the likely impact of the proposed changes. I'm not reading that very well. You've already read it. And that you recommend to Council that the issue is best addressed at a national level, taking a lead from the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, but obviously that there's continued support for the farming community in the district. For pushing for improved consultation, undertaking of a full impact assessment and consideration being given to both delaying the implementation of the reforms and to alternative proposals. So sorry, that's obviously a very brief summary of it, because obviously Andrew knows more of the detail, but effectively what we're recommending is that it's not something that we would have sufficient data to really get underneath, and that we allow central government to be raising those issues and concerns.
Yeah, you'll remember this came from full council for Andrew to look at, and at the time it went to full council, we believed there would be sufficient data already in the marketplace for us to look at, and then for us to know what effect it was going to have on East Devon. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Kevin. Oh, sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I was rudely interrupted on the 30th of January when I was trying to tell the committee that up until 1997, all farmers, landowners, anybody to do with agriculture had to fill out a census form, and on that census form You had to put down all the acreage, the total acreage that you farmed, whether you own the land or a family member owned the land that you rented, what the land was used for, what crops you were growing, if it was permanent grass. All this information, farmers had filled out a form since back in the wartime, and that form was stopped in 97. Now, oddly enough, this June, the government sent me a form, and it was just like we had back before 97. And I had to fill it all out, all the land I owned, if we sold any, how many ducks we had on the farm, how much poultry, everything was there. So the government has finally woken up and realised they made a mistake in 97. So the government will have all this information when they decipher it all. That would have been sent in by the 30th of June. Now, I'm rather disappointed with this report in the fact that you've just concentrated on the Farmers' Union. The Farmers' Union only represent probably a third of the farmers. Country Landowners Association represent 35,000 farmers, landowners. So, and there's also the Association of Livestock Auctioneers and Valuers. They could have had an input. And I thought local farmers were going to have an input. Certainly, when the motion went through council, the full council supported the motion to help our local farmers. Well, all the locals disappeared and you've put it to national now. It's not right, I don't feel. You're letting the farmers down. There were farmers here at the 30th of January. You were glad to get their information and they spoke. Where's that in the report? It's not there, it's missing. I think you're letting the farmers down in East Devon.
I'll come to him. I will answer Roy. But did you want to answer Roy, Mel, on what he said? Because I don't see this report being about the Farmers' Union, because a lot of this report was direct from the government in terms of what they were prepared in what, when you look at page 20 of the report, when it talks about the CBI economic study and the government's review of this, is quite clear the way the government are going. So what Andrew was saying is that we cannot influence the government. We've made it clear what we felt about it, but I thought, and my view is, and I'll get everybody's view in a minute, I thought the report was a very balanced report. It was disappointing that we didn't have more detail, but to have got that detail from all those various companies, if you like, other than the farm, would be an enormous amount of time. And with time at the moment, we really didn't have the time to actually spend it doing that. But don't anybody think that we as a district and as members do not care about the farmers. We do care because they provide fantastic food and employment to people in East Devon. Bethany, did you want? So yeah.
All I was going to say, and
I'd
obviously,
come back.
and just to highlight the fact that that's what the recommendation to council is saying, that there is that continued support for the farming community.
Yes. Did you want to say something else, Roy? And then I'll go.
Yes, well, sadly, the government have made many mistakes, which they've done with the fuel allowance for pensioners and others, and the PIP money. They have not relented one little bit on the inheritance tax. I don't know whether they're having conversations with the Farmers' Union now, but they wouldn't meet with them or anybody else to do with farming. The Farmers' Union had a lot of pressure put on them by the government because Angela Rayner was going to, sorry, the other woman, was going to bring in to stop the rebate diesel, red diesel, what's known as red diesel. They were going to take the money away which farmers have. A lot of diesel was bought before this statement, and it went down to, it was about 78 pence a litre after the statement, because so many farmers had bought red diesel anticipating it stopping.
Right,
The
can we
price of
cons-
diesel went down to 60 pence. But there's a lot of Labour MPs now.
Yeah, but I'm not.
They have an ideology that farmers are very wealthy, which is true. Farmers are wealthy, but they live very poor. And they see this money and they want to distribute wealth. That is what's really behind it all. They just want to use the farmers' money and redistribute the wealth. They're not interested in farming at all.
Well, that's for the government to answer. Okay, can we now move on? Kevin, did you? And then, no, first, Bethany first, please. I think Kevin was actually first. Well, wait.
Right. This is a subject which has been, in the last 6 months, debated in a very high-profile manner at a national level. And I do believe that we should be concentrating on those things where we can make a difference. In this instance, I don't believe we can. I think the report is quite clear that we're not going to get the information that we need, and even if we had it, what use would it be to us? I don't think anyway. So I fully concur with Andy Wood's conclusions on this, and for me, I think we should thank him for the report and move on.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar, to be honest. I think when the motion came to council anyway, I was sceptical about it because it is ultimately a national policy and it is for the national government to decide. And I think while we may have been able to have had an impact in that information gathering, obviously that's not the case, and the amount of time that it's going to take is not going to pay off in terms of any impact that we could have. And I think it's a really fair report, and I also commend Andy for his work on this, so I would be happy to support and propose the recommendations in the report.
Ian.
Well, I was going to apologise to Andy Wood for making him do it in the first place, because but I said at the council, you know, what possible difference will it make if East Devon writes to it? I feel sorry for the farmers. I sympathise with the farmers totally, but this is something totally outside, I think. We were trained at the start. We're supposed to be doing things to make a difference to our residents, and we can't make a difference on this. So, great report. And I would apologise to Andy for the time. He's a very busy man. He's got lots on his plate at the moment and things that we should be looking at. To me, this was a political thing and it's wrong. And I said it at the time, but I was poo-pooed.
Thank you, but I do think what...
Farmers are resident.
Excuse me. What the report does do, I think, is articulate the issues really well. And that's what I was impressed with it. And I would like us to agree the recommendations on page 17. Are we happy? We accept those. You've proposed it. Second it.
Councillor Johns.
Second it. You did want to talk. You're seconding it, aren't you? Yeah. So all those in favour of accepting that report? Yeah. Good. Right. Okay. Now what to agenda item 10. I'm giving over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So this is to provide an update on progress with the Scrutiny Action Plan, and I've been given some notes by the Democratic Services Manager to provide you with an update. So recommendation 1, which was to review the terms of reference of the 3 committees to ensure they operate in a complementary manner. The progress is that Annual Council has approved a change in the membership to be 15 councillors on Overview Committee and on Scrutiny. And then HRB will also be made 15, made up of 8 councillors and 7 tenant and independent representatives. And as part of the review of the terms of reference, the Constitution Working Group is working on this with the proposal that the frequency of meetings will be 4 per year per committee with a quorum of 4 councillors, and the terms of reference will set out specific functions of each committee and a complementary listing which will be shared by all 3 committees. Recommendations from the Constitution Working Group will be presented to Council in October on the terms of reference. Recommendation 2 in the Scrutiny Action Plan was support for scrutiny. The 3 DSOs who support scrutiny have undergone training and are now providing support as part of their roles, with further development to follow. Short-term investment is no longer available in light of local government reorganisation. And support for effective work programming and working up scoping documents is ongoing. Recommendation 3 was around senior officer support for each of the committees, and a director has been assigned to each committee, with the Scrutiny Committee, Andy Wood and Melanie Wellman, Overview Committee, Simon Davey, and HRB, Catherine Stark assigned, and directors are starting to hold meetings with the chairs of those committees. Recommendation 4 was around learning and development, and a training session was held, training from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny was held in November 2024 around work programming. Spotlight sessions are now taking place to brief committees on topics. Recent sessions have included planning enforcement and parking charges for motorhomes, and there's a spotlight session next week on public conveniences. Recommendation 5 was on prioritising work, and a meeting's being arranged with chair and vice chair of each committee to coordinate work programmes across the 3 committees. Recommendation 6 was concerned with cross-party meetings. Cross-party pre-meetings will be held as and when required, and this will depend on the items coming forward to the committees. Recommendation 7 was on development support. Officer training will be made available in September to give officers an understanding of the role of the 3 overview and scrutiny committees. And recommendation 8 finally was on having an impact, and work is underway to identify how recommendations from overview and scrutiny are tracked. Also, publicity from overview and scrutiny reviews will be put out through social media, and a recent example of this has been the outcome from the Coach Tourism TAF from the Overview Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Just one question I had with that was, with the pre-meetings, which you and I have had discussion this week, my understanding was we were always going to have a pre-meeting before, but that's not what that says. I'm just wondering, how will members know we're not going to have a pre-meeting, and how will we decide that we are or we aren't going to have pre-meetings? Is that going to be done at the pre-meeting the previous week with the chair and vice chair? Because members will need to know, because to have a pre-meeting they need to be here at 5:30, but if it's not going to have a pre-meeting they'd be here at 5 to 6. Yeah, it's deciding, Ian, that's what I'm saying, is that when do you decide? Yeah, when do you decide? Yeah. Go on.
Chair, I think the understanding was that actually the pre-meets would take place when they were required, when there was information, so for instance, background and contextual information, which would help members, and that we need to actually discuss and agree the process for that.
Yeah.
We don't have a process in place at the moment, so we do need to do that.
Yeah.
So I will pick that up with the
Thank you.
Democratic Services Manager. Thank you.
Did you? Okay, so we're just accepting those, and then we're carrying with that. So item 11, the work programme, on pages 22 to 37, and the Scrutiny Committee work programme. You've had a chance to look at that. There's something I want to say, but if you look at that in October, we haven't got anything on the agenda for October. In my suggestion is that we should have the consultancy report, which last came in January 2024. We should have that to the October meeting, because it will then be 8 months overdue, and hopefully the consultancy fees we last looked at in January 2024.
Chair, something's been put forward, I believe, about weed killers and the way the policy that we put up a few years ago, just before I became a councillor, so 2 and a bit years ago, that certainly in my town is causing issues. And I just wonder if that could come to October. I want to come to a meeting where I feel like I've come away and I've made a difference to the residents. And I just, yeah, otherwise I don't know. I understand, otherwise, just what you said about HRB, we just note things. That's basically what we do. And I just think that we need something to get into.
I'll let Mel deal with that, but we couldn't bring it to this meeting. But what we'd have to do is to debate it, whether or not we do it, and then it could come to the October meeting. So my thoughts with that one, if Melanie agrees, it goes on the September meeting to discuss, in the October meeting to actually start to move it forward. No.
Not at the moment,
yet.
not until council's agreed that. And obviously, even if it says four meetings a year in the terms of reference, you can still have additional meetings where you feel as a committee that you need them, so, well, we'll always provide the resource for the meetings, we always do. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, a lot of the work that we've been doing with all of the scrutiny committees is to make sure that when things come forward, that you know that it is a viable thing, you know what you're going to scrutinise, what benefits you're going to get from that scrutiny. So working up a proposal is really, really important. So absolutely, there is no reason why that couldn't come for September. And then, you know, if the committee decides that's something to bring forward, then we could absolutely get it onto the October agenda. But in the meantime, it allows us to speak to the relevant officers to find out some of the background information to make sure that, you know, there's real merit in you scrutinising that area.
Andrew Hancock has actually sent me an email, which I haven't read yet, to explain it. And I'm sure that we would need him or somebody from his team because we have not got the knowledge to do it ourselves. Yes, Ian.
No, sorry, again, I am new to this, so I'm trying to understand. But this was a policy that this council put into action. Our job is to look back. Is it working? Has it worked well?
Yep.
Surely that's quite simple. We don't need to have a debate about that. That is what we're looking at, isn't it? Is it working well? And can we improve on that?
Yeah, but what Melanie is saying is that a form has gone in to say we want to do it. We want to debate it. We want to say, yes, this is what this group wants to do. Why do we want to do it? That debate needs to happen. That will happen in September.
Yeah.
We'll get Andrew along, and then we will start the process, because I think it could be a really interesting piece of work, because Ian is right, because we serve on the same town council. It's something that does upset and concerns people. And I don't think we've got the answer, because there was a reason that was put in place. No. So if we can have, we scope it out on September, and then we start to discuss in October. Now, the only other thing I had, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed, on page 23 of the report, it talks about highways. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, what does this committee think? This came from full council, that we work with Devon Highways to have a spotlight to discuss highways. If you remember, that was, I can't remember which full council meeting it was. Thank you. The question for for us to decide, do we still want that? Is it of value? And if so, we need to assign a date to it.
Yeah, so my understanding from what we've got in front of us is that this was discussed and agreed at the full council meeting it would come to scrutiny. So my understanding is that because it's been recommended to us and it was agreed at full council, we can't then turn around and say we don't want to do it anyway.
Yes, you can.
But, can we? But my point would be, I think the majority of councillors, as district councillors, we all have planning applications that come in. And quite often, so I know that when I get a planning application, I'm a consultee. At the town council, I'm a consultee. As a district councillor, I'm a consultee per se. It goes to the planning committee. I understand that. The frustration for me, and I know a lot of my fellow town and parish councillors, is that we're consultees, but the experts, for example, highways, don't comment. Or they comment late. We have a deadline that we have to reply to planning applications. but we don't hear from highways. We get a standard reply from South West Water. It's the same one on every application I've seen, apart from maybe one line every now and then. We don't hear from, we don't get the reports that we need to make a proper assessment of the planning application. If it's in the conservation zone, we don't get anything from the conservation officer until late. And I fully appreciate we've only got a couple of conservation officers and we have lots of conservation areas, but it does make planning very difficult. Devon County Council cover highways. How many times have we had a planning meeting? And I've come to quite a lot of the planning committees here where we don't have the relevant information in front of us because it hasn't been put forward. So, yeah, my understanding for this is that we're going to ask them to come and say, you know, as consultees on planning applications and, you know, attendance at East Devon District Council meetings, so we can ask them questions. Not, you know, at the planning committee meetings, if there's an issue with a highway, we had it for when we're talking about the local plan for district council, you'll have ward members turning around saying, well, that bit of road's really dangerous, etc. But we've got nothing from highway saying whether it is or not. So because we can't turn it down on a highways reason unless highways object to it, it makes it very difficult to turn it down or support it on a highways reason if highways aren't there to let you know that it's okay or it's not. So that's what my understanding of this is. We're going to ask them to come to talk to us about things, and then also to agree to come to planning meetings if necessary. That's my understanding of this. So I think we should get a date for it if we can, if that's what I'm saying is correct and I'm not completely wrong.
Ian, did you want to agree with that?
Well, as usual, no, of course I'm not going to agree with it. I do agree with it. Obviously, it would be wonderful if they came along and they told us a thing. We have asked them at planning at this council. I understand at the town council level, it's really frustrating because you disagree with them and they're not there to discuss it with them. But again, you know, they have to imagine, they've got to look at every single planning application, not just East Devon, but North Devon, South Devon, Mid Devon, all the others, whatever. And most of them will be done tabletop, look at it, tick, done, finish, move on, got to find the other. They're only going to come and comment on ones that they've either got real issues with or that are bigger. So, and we've had them here before, and that's what we've been told at planning. You're unrealistic if you think they're going to comment on everyone. Same with South West Water, and I'm not trying to stick up for South West Water either. You know, but they can't comment on everything. So you comment on the ones that are really serious. What we've done at planning here, and what we've also done at planning facilities, is that if there is something that we really disagree with, then we will write back to them, and sometimes they don't even answer that. That's annoying. But I think you're going to ask them to come in, and the same question will be no different than our repairs or anything, is it comes down to resources. But we can have them in. Why not?
Remember that the question here, should it be scrutiny or should it be strategic planning? That was the key with this.
Well, certainly, obviously, strategic planning is the ones that runs planning, etc. But you know, if they've asked scrutiny to do it, we can ask the same question.
What this says is that subject to the deputy monitoring officer's checking constitutionally regarding most appropriate committee to scrutinise either scrutiny or strategic planning. And I just think perhaps we need to just take that one away and agree.
The answer to that is it could be both.
Yeah.
So strategic planning can obviously invite them to come in, you know, because it's obviously a big part of the planning process and they play a key role. So in the same way as I might invite somebody to the standards committee to talk about, you know, I don't know, DELC or somebody. So absolutely they could do that. But obviously as a scrutiny committee, you can, in terms of invite them, you can invite other bodies. I suppose what I would say is the points that have been made. What are you going to achieve by doing this piece of work? Another thing I often think is where it's something that is county-wide like this. If it was going to be done, isn't this what you would do across the county and joint scrutiny in the same way as we did with South West Water?
Yeah.
But obviously you would want to put lots of resource into that and really be looking to get something meaningful out of it. So, yeah, I would just throw that into the mix.
All I will say, Chair, is scrutiny's slightly busy at the moment because it's just opened up a can of worms and they're now re-looking at some of the allocations. So, and they're going to have a lot of meetings possibly to do that. So I don't imagine they're going to have a lot of time. So if you really think strategic planning, sorry, yeah, and not if you think this is going to be helpful, then perhaps we could help them by doing it. But I just wonder if it.
You then, Bethany.
I've been to a number of strategic planning committee where the highway officers came, and the thought of the planning committee to the strategic planning committee and the thought of the highway officers were completely divergent. We were talking two different languages. And what would really be good is to be able to understand how the highway people look at a planning application. What do they consider to be important and why do we consider it to be different? So it'll be really important, but strategic planning committee and the planning committee are the places to have it.
Yeah, I was going to say, sort of in line with what Councillor Barlow said, I don't know realistically what we'd actually be able to get out of this. I think it's all well and good them coming and having a conversation with us about their process and sort of which applications they choose to comment more thoroughly on and those that they don't and things like that. But I imagine it's going to be a capacity issue in their teams. It's going to be which applications might be a bit more controversial, which they're a bit more concerned about. And ultimately, I think that it's at the moment probably not worth our time when we've got other things that we can look at that we could potentially make a difference with. And I think it might be worth linking in with other councils across the county to have a more collaborative approach rather than us looking at this, because ultimately I don't know what we get out of it other than complaining to them potentially.
No, I think Melly's make a really important point, because then you could have an area-wide one. You could have 2 or 3 scrutiny committee members from each of the districts, because then they could do it once. The problem with us doing it, then will Exeter want to do it? Will then Plymouth want to do it? So it's
Unless they want to talk about potholes, because I've got a lot to talk about.
yes, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. I think this decision between scrutiny or strategic planning, I think, needs to come down to the sort of work we think we're doing. So scrutiny looking backwards, if we've got data about how many planning applications have run into real problems for our committee deliberating because they had no input from highways, and if we had that sort of data, we can look back and scrutinise that and say, well, actually, there was excess discussion going on, or we were delaying responses because we didn't get that. There's some data for us to get our teeth into. If it's more about building a working relationship so that the district in general plans strategically to do the things we do in a way which is consistent with the requirements and the capabilities of roads, county, or South West Water, then that's much more strategic planning, because that's where you should be joining those things up. That's a strategic function, in my view.
Jenny, and then we'll call this.
Yeah, problem with highways is they do respond to planning applications and they do like their desktop report, which is from known accidents that have been reported to the police. So when you get a planning application going through and you've got local knowledge of people who know all the accidents that have happened in these hotspots, but because the highways have said, no, it's fine, this is what's happened, no, it doesn't work. So there's no real joined up thinking between what the actual local knowledge is with their desktop police reports.
But what we've got to try to decide today is, do we car park this for now and then come back, and, or do we say, yes, we want to do it, or do we ask scrutiny to do it, or do we have an area-wide?
I suggest we don't want to do it, Chair. I nothing personal, but I think it's the wrong place. I think it's the wrong time. And again, if we've got other things we want to look at, that we can make a difference with, because I don't think we're going to make a difference with this.
And in the thing about strategic planning, that committee doing it, it does affect strategic planning. Whereas with us, we would then have to pass that information over to strategic planning. So I think you're right. So shall we put that back to the Deputy Monitoring Officer to discuss it with strategic planning? Yes.
I suggest we give it to the proper monitoring officer, not the deputy.
You're a tip. Anyway, that does, with your permission, thank you. I now bring the meeting to a close. Thank you for.
Is there anything else any of the members think that we should be looking at? Is that not a thing we should
Well,
be asking?
We've only got the consultancy one and the first draft of doing the insecticide, but is there anything else anybody wants to go on September?
Now, can I just ask, the overview meeting that's coming up with the public conveniences, that is a joint overview and scrutiny?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
But see, the thing is, whilst I'm not too concerned about how meaty September and October is at the moment, you never know what may come out of that spotlight meeting. It may need either scrutiny or overview to take something away from that. So I'm not too concerned about that, but there's nothing else anybody would like to add now to the September meeting to take Ian's part? No. So let's call that meeting to an end, and thank you for your coming and a safe journeys home.
Thank you, Chair.
Can pass this down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So